This is Illiterate. My name is Evan.
My name is Taylor. I read some stuff this week.
I watched a movie. This week we are covering The Matrix. The Matrix Resurrections has just been released on HBO Max and into theaters. I have just seen it this morning.
And no spoilers for anyone that
No spoilers,
Taylor. Yeah.
Exactly. So Taylor wants to see it, is invested in the franchise. So this is really looking at the franchise and all that went into creating it, all of its references. I couldn't be more excited. I'm glowing having left, having just come away from the new one. I really, really enjoyed it. I've just had a lot of fun, and it was a delight because I didn't know what to expect, and I wasn't expecting to like it very much, and it was just great. So I can't wait to pick this apart and look into what is really one of the most ubiquitous franchises of my lifetime, and something that really happened very quickly.
Right.
It's very interesting, the original material, how quickly a span that was created, released, and then was done. And then
5 years, yeah.
Let's put this in perspective. Let's think of how much The Matrix impacted just culture, just like 2000 style, like fashion. Then let's think of something like James Cameron's Avatar, who had no cultural impact. It was huge, massive, but like,
what's the main
don't
character's
talk about
name?
the Na'vi. Yeah.
Name any of the characters' names, yeah.
So, the Matrix is something that has become, I mean, the more I think about it, the more I'm glad that we're going back. Here we are.
Here we are. So, as a lot of people probably know, the Wachowski siblings pulled a lot of influences. Hopefully, we'll see some of the more minute ones or nuanced ones because, the biblical allegories, the savior character, the hero's journey, all of that stuff is pretty much overwrought and dissected on YouTube video essays. So we'll try and give some context for why they made this the way they did and who they are.
Just on the offset, I'm excited because I've been, we've been other things this year. We've been studying. I've been into anime, which is very, very new for me. And additionally to the new movie, before that came out, me and my wife watched The Animatrix, which was massive. Massive at the time. And I remember like my brother's generation, just like that was their favorite. It was like the cultural thing.
Yeah.
Aside from the movies, it was as far as an animated feature, the biggest movies of our time. I finally got to check that out, which gave massive context to the overreaching story. And I highly recommend that. And we're going to cover that as well. But that was additionally something that I delved into to prepare.
Yeah, I want to check it out because it definitely also gave rise to, we even covered the Star Wars visions and these other things that are taking a big property and giving it to other hands in animation. Yeah, so that's all part of the franchise. From the sibling standpoint, and they have very sparse interviews, which I'll explain why, but one of the things they said, they saw 2001: A Space Odyssey as kids and were really frustrated by it, as I was watching it at one point, because it's so allegorical and symbological and whatnot. And then they asked their dad, what is the black obelisk thing? And
the monolith.
Yeah, monolith, that's it.
I'd say to my wife all the time, it's our phones.
Yeah. Well, so the dad said, it's a symbol for the consciousness of God. And that's still frustrating if you're 9 years old because what the heck does that even mean?
What? This is not a good movie from 9 years old,
Yeah. But, I mean, you could see the start of that where it says, it could be an interpretation of a lot of different things. And your 9-year-old interpretation of what God means or any of that stuff, it
think about that in retrospect, being frustrated by a story at a certain point in your life, but then growing up and realizing how the frustration there is actually where more story actually might live. The device actually is like, well, it got me thinking in this direction, which is incredibly important. How did it do that?
Yeah.
Just from a creative perspective, putting that into context, looking backwards, I think is really important. And they were able to see, they didn't just write it off and go like, frustrating, didn't please me. They went, that's frustrating. Why? It's making me think. Why? And then they understood why, and they understood more about the story. And then, a device. It got me thinking in a direction. Fascinating.
Yeah. And that the parents would not give you the answer or say you're too young to understand. But challenge you on what a symbol might mean or what you think it means is very critical to their media development. Yeah. So
That's
they
fascinating.
dropped out of college, got work doing some comic book stuff, eventually shifted over to screenwriting, and had the Matrix script in 94, spent years writing on it. The way that they got into Hollywood was they had written this film, Assassins, which was a spec script, meaning that nobody asked them to do it. That was kind of their
wholly original. They're just trying to sell an original script and an original idea.
Right. It gets Stallone and Banderas as actors in it, and they said that it was completely rewritten by this other guy, which it was, when it eventually got made, and they tried to even have their names removed off of it.
Oh, wow.
But from that, they realized, well, we have to be the directors or we're never going to survive as writers in this town from their perspective.
Right.
And it makes sense if that's your first foray into the business and your thing
Right.
gets butchered and then you
oh God, they'll do that to it? Well, this is never going to work. You know, like we're never going to get this idea to the screen if we have to go through that.
The ironic thing, though, is directed by Richard Donner, who did Superman in 78. And so it's kind of interesting how The Matrix then sort of ends the Stallone era of action movies, the big brutish guys with catchphrases. And Matrix also then reinvents superhero films where Superman was this very comic book cheesy wink. And then superhero movies became The Dark Knight and whatnot thereafter.
I mean, the trajectory, the timeline is really interesting. You have the first Matrix in 99, and then you have the Marvel X-Men in 2000, and the Raimi Spider-Man right on its heels in 2002. So when this actually comes out, it's so fascinating to hear how early it's gestating. They have a draft by 94. It doesn't reach the screens until 99, but when you look at the cinema that it is surrounded with at the time, what a moment. And how beyond any conceived plan, I mean, how influential it would be on all of the things that are coming out around it. It's fascinating.
Definitely that it well, we'll get into some of the filmic stuff that The Matrix does, but as far as what they got Assassins, which, like we said, they didn't like it all. But luckily with this, Joel Silver is the producer, and he bought 3 of the things that they had written. So testament to writers. You got to have a lot of different, you can't just have one thing.
What else you got? What else you got? What else you got?
So he bought Assassins, and then he bought The Matrix, and then he also bought this film Bound, which then becomes the first film that they write and direct together. And this comes out the year later in 96. A small project, smaller budget. It is this thriller with a happy ending, but it revolves around this lesbian couple, but that's not intrinsic to the plot at all. So that made waves for them of being like, well, it's not about that, it's a part of it. But of course, the themes, it's about assumptions of a woman's sexuality, playing to the stereotypes of what because the genre they're playing in is sort of the film noir / the humor of the Billy Wilder comedies of the old days, Some Like It Hot, that kind of thing. So those are all their influences that they're going with. And you can even see some of that carried over to later works, at least with the ideas of identity and...
Oh, yeah. And we'd be remiss not to directly highlight how interesting their point of view is, because they're making these as men. And as we know now, they're both women. And everything that they have made touches on some thematic issue here with identity. And it's fascinating to be viewing different pieces of art from two people who have traversed the line. It's actually fascinating to have them making art at this level and be able to follow their perspective through that transition. It's actually quite incredible. And the more I think about what they did, not only with the original trilogy, but now with the new one, and more so with Lana with the new one, but how they are able to speak on these thematics without it being overwrought or too obvious. It's actually quite beautiful and nuanced. It's going to be widely important as these films continue to age, and as they, we'll see what happens to them down the road. But I think we're going to look back at this and who they were and who they became, and it's going to be something that we look at for a long time as being really important.
Like you're saying, oh, look at the themes and the influences and the things they're perhaps not able to say because it's 1996. Yeah.
I would take a Wachowski's retrospective on identity, and thematics any day of the week. That'd be an incredible course. I'll put it together. No, they're not even done. They're not done yet. But I'm just like, you could start that class right now, and it would be so rich. But an exciting future of what they will become in terms of artists, what they will have accomplished.
Yeah. So with that, they did this film Bound, but even though they directed it, still did not have the backing of Warner Brothers and whatnot to say, oh yeah, you can tackle your Matrix script.
Right.
That we bought.
Because at the time it's like, well, this is impossible.
Yeah.
It sounds like the third book of Dune, like.
Yeah.
It's like, well, did you see Tron?
Yeah, your low budget thriller crime thing is nowhere close to this. So
what else you got?
Thanks. Yeah. So what the Wachowskis did is they hired some comic book artists that they had known before or were at least privy to, and drawn a 600-page shot-by-shot storyboard for the film. And then
oh my God,
this helped to get the studio's approval on it for them as the directors.
So does that early comic exist publicly?
Yeah, there was a book that came out called The Art of the Matrix, which is the shooting script for it, and essentially the 600-page. There's no speech bubbles or anything like that, but it's basically
to Barnes and Noble.
I'll post a link to that. Pretty wild that they had to do all of that just to then say, "We want to be the directors."
Man, I get it. It's so frustrating when they clearly have a concise vision for what they're doing. And even I'm looking at the new stuff and it's just Lana directing the new one, and I'm going like, wow, the conceptualization, the design of the moment, I'm like, it's just gorgeous. It's frustrating, but I mean, I totally get it. And now I'm dying to see these storyboards.
Kind of like reminds me of last week with Lucille Ball and them having to do the vaudeville show to prove that they could do the TV show.
It is.
It's like, even if you get the yes, you still have to say, well, we really got to prove it to you. We see that again and again.
I mean, that's the whole essence with TV pilots, because what people don't even understand a lot of the time is pilots are completely reshot. They'll be completely recast. They'll set it in a different place. But that's the idea, is like, well, let's see if it works. Let's try it.
Because old William Golding from Princess Bride, he said nobody knows anything.
Yeah.
And that's, you got to prove it. So the cast was required to understand and explain the Matrix. They really wanted to make sure that you knew what in the world this movie was about. Which one of the things, because they asked Will Smith to be Neo, but he turned it down because he didn't understand it and probably didn't want to go into it that much. So he did Wild Wild West.
See, it's like, that's a conversation that could have never happened on like the original Blade Runner, because nobody knew what had a concerted idea of what they were doing. I'm actually like, this is good on them for actually like holding the cast accountable for being able to answer a college like essay question about the plot of the film that they are in, and like the overwhelming mechanics of the story, the setting.
Well, so the book then that had to be read by most of the cast and crew is Jean Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation, which came out in 1981. I didn't read it, but I kind of got the gist of it. It's this philosophical conceit about what is real and what isn't. And it's interesting in the sense that the book is featured in the first film to be noticed by people that know what they're talking about. So it's in the first film. It's before he figures out everything, Neo. And it's the book that he uses to conceal these discs that he's not supposed to be figuring out what the Matrix is. So when he goes into his grungy apartment and finds this book on the shelf, and it's Simulacra and Simulation, and he opens it up, and there's a hole in it, and he puts his little things. And also when Morpheus says, "Welcome to the desert of the real," that's one of the lines from the book
Oh, wow.
as well. So they really very much
Wow.
pulling from
Okay.
it. And I found in an interview, Lana was saying that the point of the reference is that the book itself is hollow because it's cut out the chapter, like it's its own construct of reality, because the author of the book was pretty much saying they didn't get the point of it or whatever. Like, didn't really. And also, I went sort of a deep dive into this because I'm crazy. And when they put in the book, he opens up, Neo does, and there's a hole in the book, and the chapter preceding it is you can see the title of it. I'll post a link to the video. It says On Nihilism. But actually, in the book, that On Nihilism is the last chapter of the book. So it wouldn't be when you opened up to the middle of the book. So the Wachowskis are purposefully changing it and placing it there. You know, it's all allegory and symbol of what they're trying to say. So it wasn't like they didn't know what they were doing, because you wouldn't flip around the chapters of a book for literally half a second of a frame of it, you know.
I don't want to spoil anything, but I had to stop and rewind the first act of the new movie because I thought I was seeing things. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm just saying that they're visual masters.
Yeah. Yeah, because speaking of visual mastery, that's sort of the long and short of the simulacra, which would be a copy of an original thing. And that's kind of this philosophy, is saying that these copies supersede and you lose the original altogether. And that's kind of what he's saying, is all these symbols of culture and media and capitalism and whatever are oversaturated, and the constructs of society are actually now meaningless because they're just the copies of the copies and have lost all sense of everything. So that if you wanted to get one of the thematics that they're pulling on, it's from this particular book.
Oh man, I love it.
But just cool that they're like, yeah, everybody's got to read it, because this is kind of what we're trying to talk about.
We're on a mission, people. This is a ship, and everybody has required reading. Without this knowledge, this ship will sink.
And you cannot act in this because you will not understand what you're even saying.
Your words help keep it afloat. You must understand them.
So one of the other books that then they're also pulling from is called Neuromancer by William Gibson in 1984. And the term matrix is where this comes from, that's prevalent. We mentioned it maybe when we were talking about Philip K. Dick, which I highly recommend everybody go back to. That's episode 80, because he's sort of the start of cyberpunk, which is then what this lineage follows. But Neuromancer is where we get the term cyberspace. And it's also called the Matrix in this book.
Okay.
Gibson had said, since of course he has seen the Matrix film, he had said the way that they draw from all the cyberpunk works is the same sort of thing he did or relied upon for his own writing. But you couldn't make a Neuromancer film now because so much is what they used. You know what I mean? It would seem,
I like that what he said about it. I like that he's picking up on how rich and referenced they are, and that is the work of good storytelling. Yes, they're using my stuff, but they're using all this other stuff that's speaking to the same or the same wheelhouse. It's not in the same direction necessarily, but it's in the same area, and they're all connected in the same ideas.
Drawing, because like William Gibson, he's pulling from Philip K. Dick's work in the 70s, where we had talked about, like, Philip K. Dick said, he believed he was living in the Matrix. And then with William Gibson stuff, like you're talking about, life potentially imitates art. I saw an essay where they're saying a lot of the stuff that he puts, because in 1984, there's no cell phones, he still has the idea of like phone booths. That was one thing he couldn't predict. But they were saying a lot of what he puts in about cyberspace may have been, in a way, what inspired the way that the actual internet developed it. It's like he wrote it, and then they,
Stop, you're creating it.
These nerds in the 80s read it and then said, oh, this is what we're going to develop in this fashion.
No, you're doing it right now. Stop. No, I'm working against it. No, you're doing it. No, you're doing it. You're breathing life into existence.
You're giving people
now.
ideas.
Put the pen down.
So one of the things that the Wachowskis did of their own volition is hire choreographer and director Yen Wu Ping for the fight scene stuff, which was very much the Eastern influence of wire fu and fighting. He had done Fist of Legend with Jet Li in 1995. So
this is something this was an aspect on the films that I was very much thinking of while I was meditating in the new one and looking into these older ones, because one of, it's obviously has, an Eastern animation influence for, but we're doing it live action. And so people always talk about the difference between, you can't just do an anime live action. Well, what does that look like when you bring it to life? And I thought, well, man, the Wachowskis really sat down and kind of figured that out, because the Matrix is the closest thing to a live action anime, to be honest, that I can point to. But then you look down at the fight scenes, very, very different from how an anime fight scene would play out, in lots of slow motion and internal monologue and that kind of thing, where the Matrix has the kung fu sequences, the bullet time sequences. That is all what filled in the gaps, because it's not you can't just put anime into live action cinema. It doesn't translate that the same way. So they had to figure out what would work compelling to a real live action setting in place and time. So it was really interesting to see that, like, so their choices sat down. Well, how do we bring an anime style fight sequence to the screen live action? And this is how you do it.
You had even said, like, with the emergence of superhero stuff, that also heavily influenced, because it's like, we can do crazy stuff that superheroes could do, and if we take it seriously, it won't look goofy. So, like you're saying, X-Men, and then also I saw Charlie's Angels. Both of them came out in 2000, the very next year.
Wow.
And used these wire fu techniques, as well as Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon also came out in 2000.
Because everybody's standing around making these movies before they see it, going like, well, how are we going to do this and not look like idiots? How are we going to do this and it feel compelling? Which 20 years on sounds a little silly, because we've found all the techniques. But at the time, there was a reason something was animated. There was a reason something was a comic book and not a movie. And we forget that now.
Yeah. So right along with the understanding, dodging around, not having a lot of information on them, in their contracts, they included a no press clause, which is why a lot of people didn't even know they transitioned, or it was a shock, or this or that, because they give no interviews, they do no publicity, it's in their contracts. They're not public figures at all. So that kind of also lends this, what does it mean? What do the symbols in the movie mean? What are the interpretations of it?
Right. It adds a mystique to it just by not even giving a face to the question.
Because they don't
there's not a face to give the question to.
Yeah. So that I didn't realize is like intrinsic to their process, and also just
I had no idea.
The contracts of, they're not like, we don't want any of this.
I'm sitting here going like, really? There's no interview. I'm like, wow, there's no press junket. I'm like, I didn't even notice, like I'm not even thinking about it. That's fascinating. Now I'm like, well, wait, I want to go see what interviews they have given.
There's a few. Yeah. I'll post some links. It's more recent, but in the spur of the early 2000s, zilch.
Yeah.
Reloaded and Revolutions, the next two sequels, came out in May and November of 2003, but they filmed them both.
They came out the same
time.
Year. Oh my god!
Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
But they filmed them both at the same time. I didn't realize that Reloaded did so well. It was the highest-grossing R-rated film until Deadpool in 2016.
Oh, I did not know that. That's really amazing, actually. Wow.
People were hyped for the sequel, and then it destroyed. Yeah. Part of the production, Lana specifically, had said in later interviews she was very depressed and struggling with the gender situation, and realizing eventually that she would have to tell her parents and siblings and all that stuff. And she had said that the reason she had gone swimming in the bay rather than in the pool was she was hoping to be hit by a boat or a shark, or so, just like, really, this in the making of all of these movies is recognizing, this is who I am. I have to say this or tell, I can't not be this anymore. Her mom and dad flew to Australia, which is where they shot them for budgetary reasons and whatnot. And Lana had told them and was met with extreme love and support, which is exactly what you need. And she says that that's like the main reason they're able to go through with all of this, is because everybody close to them. So the next, a couple days later, the whole family goes out to dinner, and Lana is wearing women's dress, and a waiter referred to Lana and Lynn, who is her mom, as ladies out in public. And so then the next day, Lana showed up to set with her new identity, and of course then the press, and rumors and craziness and all that stuff, and also coupled with the fact that they're not public people. But that all was going on with it, because we hear about it later when they're doing Speed Racer or whatever. But it was all going on within the context of making these Matrix movies.
Yeah.
As
I didn't really have a context for their journey, really. And because they're not public people, really. I didn't understand that they're going through that and coming out during the production of these.
Yeah. Lily didn't fully come out until 2016. But yeah, right. Like you said, not being public also, I don't know if they necessarily were coming out to the public in this way. But it is of note the fact that it was not 10 years. It's in this, it's not. Yeah. The Matrix is a part of all of this. It's not, they were successful and did this thing, and then later they decided, it's none of that nonsense.
No, this is intrinsically part of it.
Yeah. So with all of that, as you had said, tons of Matrix stuff, because the 3 video games, Enter the Matrix Online, which was the big MMO, The Path of Neo, and the Animatrix are all coming out within the next 3 years thereafter, 2 or 3 years. And you had seen the Animatrix. I saw that they had written 4 of the segments, but they didn't direct any of them. They said, we want other people to put their spin on it.
I remember it being such a big deal, aside from the movies themselves, but I felt like the Animatrix was, I felt like the Animatrix was almost as popular as the first movie, really? In terms of just like the first movie was
to it. Yeah.
The Animatrix, I felt like I couldn't get away from. Maybe it's just because I had an older brother who was like the target audience for the time. Right. But like I don't even know if he liked it, but I know all of his friends. I just like it eclipsed the 2 other sequels to me. So and it's just something I wasn't ready for. So I'm almost glad that I waited until now to dive into it, because as we already mentioned, we covered the Star Wars and Marvel anime series, What If and Visions, earlier this year, this is obviously the predecessor for, it's like cut and dry.
And we're surprised that more people have not taken this approach and said, here's a big property with lots of stories. Yeah, give it.
I'm like, where's the Terminator,
or the Harry Potter or
I don't know. I think it's such a viable art form. I'm really doing some research in particular this year on this genre and just how interesting it is in particular. The themes that they touch on, the themes that are so strong, and this is just a perfect marriage of style and substance. And it's, if you're into heady stuff, sit back and let this wash over you.
And in a way, back to the source, like the Matrix, because they're so inspired by anime, Ghost in the Shell, these other pieces.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like
Ghost in the Shell, and that's interesting you say that one, because I actually just saw that in IMAX this year. It's such a particularly interesting piece because of where it comes out, because it comes out in the middle of the 90s.
Yeah. I think the same year their Assassins one. I think it came out in 95.
That sounds exactly right. Yeah. It has the luxury of coming out after a lot of, after Akira, after Blade Runner. It is taking so much of the same thematics and running with it that I saw it coming out in late 95. It became obvious that Ghost in the Shell was a clear reference, but that not a reference, and almost a passing of the torch of like trying to get to the heart of what these thematics, what these questions are really asking us. I don't know. It's all clicking for me.
Yeah. I had even seen with the aesthetics of it. So the Ghost in the Shell opening credits, that's the green numbers going across the screen. They go horizontal, but vertical. That's the Matrix digital rain kind of thing that then became everybody's screensaver in the 2000s. Like that's at the beginning of Ghost in the Shell, this anime film. So what now
like
everybody
they're
says.
looking
the
at Ghost in the
Matrix,
Shell, and they're like, well, how do we do this on the big screen? How do we do a fight sequence like this, but we do it compelling? Just like that's the questions they set out to answer going into 1998 when they went to film this thing.
Yeah, and the themes and everything. So they had now, God, they got the video games, which is one takes place during Matrix Reloaded, one is the MMO that's after Revolutions, so people think it's done, and then Path of Neo is playing the movies as a video game, and they have the Animatrix, and they have the 3 films, and all of that is from 99 to 2005.
Right.
Is when
I played Enter the Matrix. It was very fun. The style, the aesthetic is all there.
And they were in there writing the games, and I mean, they're huge gamers, so they're all in it. But all of this is now done, and then here we come to our big why question of like, is this new one Resurrections? Is this just like Space Jam where they're like, well, we got to have something new from the old again?
I know. I on the outset, you go, okay, so the last Matrix film came out in 2003.
Yeah.
So why in the world is one coming out now in 2021?
Is this some Hollywood junk again? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, who's the audience for that? Who asked for it? Are kids what do they want this? Like I'm like,
yeah.
On the outset, a lot of questions of well, why the timing? Why now? Why not 10 years ago? Why not 2008? And then even further, why is it just Lana on this one?
So here's the story then.
Very, very interesting.
The answer to all your questions behind all of this. During the production of the original trilogy, they had no intention of making any more Matrix. They knew this is it. We're out. And so
it feels pretty definite,
Yeah.
Then that's pretty much the biggest thing is everybody's going like, but the story ended, like it ended.
And they know that too. But every year Warner Brothers is like, how about that Matrix? How about
coming back for that other one? Snapping at him.
And there was one interview that I saw in February of 2015 working on their film Jupiter Ascending, which was like an original space opera thing. And Lily had said that a return to the Matrix was, quote, a particularly repelling idea in these times. Because they're like, Hollywood does not want original material at all. Yeah. And we want to keep doing different things and write new things but there was always
one of the opening lines of dialogue, again, without ruining anything, is why use a copied code? Why not do something original?
Yeah.
And I'm immediately you're online. You're going like, oh,
they're aware.
They're aware. This movie is talking about something. This movie has something to say. I can't wait. I can't wait to talk to you about it, Taylor.
Who else was talking about getting it done? Keanu and Hugo Weaving. They had always said they'd be down to do more if the Wachowskis were involved, though. They weren't going to do it without their blessing.
No, yeah.
But I think Warner ultimately owned it, and so they just went against their sentiments. Because in 2017, they were developing a relaunch without them, which I didn't know about. Yeah,
I did not know that. Oh, my God.
Zach Penn, who had done some, I think, superhero stuff, some action stuff, he wrote a treatment with Michael B. Jordan in the lead role. It would be tied to the source material somehow, if that makes sense. So they're not just going to go off
a new story in the Matrix?
Yeah, kind of, but still in line with what was going on with Morpheus and Neo and Trinity and all of that stuff. So they weren't just going to be like, well, here's a whole different thing, but just stealing all the ideas. So
yeah, I don't know about that because even going into this one, I'm like, there takes some magicism to the storytelling woven in with the thematics that the Wachowskis understand. It is their story. So I have huge reservations about even just one doing it, that an entirely other person with no input from the Wachowskis whatsoever. I'm like, okay, that's
with a young Morpheus. Yeah,
Space Jam 2.
That was, well, that was all in the works, up until, so what happens then is in 2019, Ron and Lynn Wachowski, the parents, both passed away within a few weeks, along with a close friend of Lana. And so this is coming from a personal place, a part of the grieving process. She said, struggling with all of this and then conceived of the resurrection story to the Matrix, it sort of came to her. And she said, well, she couldn't have her parents back. She could have Neo and Trinity. and feel comforted to see them again. And kind of reminded me of Sweet Tooth that we had talked about, where there's this whole other thing in the pandemic that he's writing and the Netflix show is going on, and it kind of resurrected these characters for him. And in a way, she said, it's like, well, that's art. It's like, I'm doing something with people who have passed and now they're coming back and these are characters. But it's sort of, that's what art helps you do, is process these things. So it all came
without
from,
that, it doesn't feel alive. You gotta have something. You gotta thrive on something real in your story, and the more you do, the more compelling it will be. I mean, having seen the new one, everything you're telling me makes so much sense.
So, it's good in that it probably, and this is me theorizing, obviously it comes from this personal place, but maybe also a bit of like, well, they're going to butcher it if I don't do something soon.
Yes.
Like they're making it wrong.
They outright say that in the movie. That becomes a line of dialogue.
Oh, really?
If they're going to do it without us. So, yeah.
Right. So this is all then interwoven, but it is good that it comes from this place of, I'm trying to reckon with the thematics of the deaths of two people that are important to me and them coming back and all that stuff. So the reason then Lily does not get involved is she has been working. They both did this series Sense8, which was on Netflix that then got canceled, but was really cool. But Lily wrote, directed, and produced this show called Work in Progress on Showtime. And so she continued to work on that. And also she was saying, this is not my thing. This is Lana's idea, and this is her process
your story
for grieving our parents. And Lily's like, I'm, painting and doing other things, and that's how I'm getting through it. So I don't need to step in these older waters. And also with her transition, it was later.
How
so she's
mature.
like, this is just going to bring up all the stuff that was going on with me when I was.
I don't have anything to add. I don't have anything that's going to improve this. You obviously have the inspiration for this. This is your thing. I don't know that I could yes and you in a way that would do it any good, which is beautiful maturity.
Yeah. First of the films that is directed by only one of them. Although Lana did have other writer help on it, co-written with two other literary novelists who have done some screenplay stuff, but David Mitchell, who wrote Cloud Atlas, which was the crazy cool book. I love the book that they made the movie.
I love the movie, dude. That's what I And then I'm a staunch defender of that movie, and I've started reading the book, and one day I will continue and finish it. But I guess I read the book first before they had even conceived of the movie. So that's where the classic stuff. But no, it's great. But he co-wrote this Matrix Resurrections, as well as Alexander Hemon, who they both helped on Sense8, the Netflix show. Cool.
And they all wrote they all wrote the finale.
So there's a living link between so they're working with Lily. There's a living creative link Lana. Between all four of them. So no, I'm saying if they're working on Sense8, so they're connected with Lily. So the gang is all working creatively together, just not on all the same things all at once.
Right. And what's cool is if you go to the Wikipedia page, like the Wachowskis use mostly the same crew for everything. Same cinematographer, same storyboard artist, same everybody is on board, which is cool.
You have that one bad experience and it dictates your entire modus operandi. You're just like, nope, it has to be how we want it, or else it will absolutely get burned.
And it's a family and we stick together. Yeah.
I love it.
Because I had seen it. I did, they wrote and produced V for Vendetta, but didn't direct it. But I didn't realize that the person who directed it, James McTeague, was the first AD, the first assistant director for all the Matrix trilogy.
No way. I did not know that. That's so cool.
They offered the film to him. They said, he had done it. And I love that movie.
I really like the movie. Yeah. It's so weird because I've been trying to buy that on Blu-ray since Black Friday, and my wife wants me to shut up about it because I'm screaming about a 15-year-old movie I can't find at the store like an old man.
But it's just so cool that he worked with them on this was the first AD,
That's
which is
awesome.
not a super creative it's not really a directorial.
No, it's more managerial and helping you get
Logistics
through your day. But
yeah.
it's not to say that those people can't be also talented in other directions, and for them to see that, understand that, invest in him, prop him up for an opportunity like that. I mean, he got to direct V for Vendetta. What in the world?
Yeah, so that's super cool. Just a random side note, you're talking about DVDs and trying to find them and whatnot. There was a 2004 10-disc release of DVDs about all the Matrix stuff.
Whoa, no way.
With 6 discs of additional material. But what's interesting is it's mostly behind-the-scenes documentary stuff, because they do not like deleted scenes, directors' extended cuts. Like, they're not into that. Also, in terms of like audio commentary, they don't have a commentary of them talking about their interpretations, and they don't want that in the public sphere of what they want people to interpret on their own. But what's so cool with this 2004 release, each of the films has 2 different audio commentaries on it, and one of them is a group of philosophers who like the films, and another is by critics who did not like the films.
Whoa, dude, no way. I've got to check this out.
Yeah, they want viewers to have their own opinion. So, like, what director would do that on their film instead of having a vanity, let's talk about how we made this cool movie? No, we're going to have 2 different ones.
We waited till sunrise because the light is just right at 6:32 a.m. So the crew had to wait for 4 hours while we sat for the sun.
Or this is exactly what I meant to say by this. No, here's some philosophers and here's some people that said this was garbage. So
I love that, man. I'm going to go check that out.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I've never heard of an experiment like that at all, ever.
Yeah,
you're going to record a commentary for the group of people who didn't like your film, and you're going to
put it in the extra features. Yeah,
and then cool. you can compare and contrast with a group of philosophers who did.
Yeah, that's cool. I never knew that.
It's incredible.
Yeah. So we touched on a lot of the symbols and the trends and the reason they don't want to talk about it exactly. But I had seen in an interview that Lana had done in 2012, she was trying to say, can we get the audience to go through the 3 movies and experience what Neo experiences, where the first movie is very classical in its approach, and then the second movie follows this sort of deconstructionist philosophy. Well, everything you thought in the first movie to be true is not. And he's not the one, and there were a bunch of Matrixes, and so people are like, stop hurting me in this way. Like, I want to understand it. And then that's the same way people get upset with that philosophy, she's saying. And then the third movie is the most ambiguous because you're supposed to find the meaning in it and construct the meaning based on what you decide. So I think that's where the original trilogy gets a lot of criticism, but then it made sense to me as she was laying it out as like, no, it's all kind of an experiment on people having to do with what they make meaning out of, which then makes sense why they're not in the public eye, why they don't put commentaries on their DVDs, why they don't want extra scenes, because they
it's all in the first movie, the scene, I forget the character's name, but he's talking about steak, it's like
Cypher.
It's real to me. It's here. It's it's good here. It's real to me now. That do I put value in this, or do I put value in this other thing that I can't feel, or it's not real to me in this moment. It's all present in that conversation. Where do you derive value? And that's so different for everybody else. Yeah, for everyone.
And with as you mentioned, the first movie and kind of the representations that they have in there, they have come out more in explaining, or at least addressing the fact that yes, there were metaphors and symbols and things that had to do with the struggle with gender identity, but the world wasn't quite ready, and neither were they to a degree.
It doesn't have to be about that, but it can be very present, and it can be linked up, intrinsically linked with the trajectory of your thematics and your plot. Like, it doesn't, they don't, I think looking back, I'm like, it's beautiful that it's present. It's beautiful that it's there, because now there's all the argument in the world to say that it's subconsciously affecting every choice they're making while making those films.
Well, and Lana was saying in this 2012 interview, she was described, like I said, struggling at the time in the second and third films. She couldn't even say the word transgender to admit it to herself, but still there are these influences. I found this great video where somebody takes her when she was talking in 2012 and sequences and pieces from the the first film.
Oh, really?
And it really, really puts in a great context for like, no, they were putting this stuff in intentionally, like they put in this book and changed the chapter around, like they're not just, there's a lot of stuff to do with that in the original film. One of the biggest one is when it says system failure, and then that's when the camera zooms in between the words. But the end of the word system and the beginning of the word failure is M and F, and it sort of rests on there as you're going in between the two into the Matrix.
Oh, wow.
And of course, they're never going to say that was intentional, but just in terms of this little short thing where this person is put together in conjunction with what she's saying and all the mirrors that they use and her talking about her like looking into a mirror, understanding what she's seeing in it and all of that. It was just very, very interesting.
I can't wait, dude. The mirrors, the reflections. I thought I was seeing stuff. I can't wait for you to see this movie, man.
Yeah. The last little thing in regards to the gender identity and what they were doing in the original film, the character Switch, which also her name is Switch, dies in the first film, but she was originally written in the script as a man in the real world, but a woman in the Matrix. And that got cut out of the script, and she's just a woman in both of them. But
it's good to know. It's very, very, very good to know that is the history of the character. And I mean,
it's
makes
just
sense.
And Lily was saying, because of course they're not going to directly say, like I said, what was in for what reasons, but she said it's a cool thing because it's an excellent reminder that art is never static. They're glad that it's like this is an interpretation. It's not the interpretation, but it's a way to look at a lot of the things that are in this. And that's really what The Matrix did so well, is like there's so much, can be a parable in any way that you want it.
It's rich, man. It's so rich. You can and again, you can derive meaning any direction you want to look. I read that they started filming right as the pandemic started, and that they questioned whether or not they would be able to actually finish the movie.
Oh yeah.
And that Lana herself was, questioned of whether or not, they could just leave it and move on. But it was the cast that insisted that she finish it. So
That's
I thought
cool.
that was really fascinating.
That's kind of like their family situation in a way where she's like, oh, there's all these people around me that we keep going together. And if she's going to be like, no, you know what, maybe it's not worth it. And then they're like, no, this would be a horrible forever lost film that never got completed. We have to.
Right. They started filming in February 2020 and they resumed in August 2020. So we'll see what happens. I'm excited to see how this plays at the box office. I want to see what general reactions are for it, because I was really delighted and surprised by how authentic and how alive this story really feels. How I was like, well, how is this story from 1999 gonna have, gonna come back out of nowhere from 20 years ago and have something to say about the mess we find ourselves in now? And boy, was I wrong, because it is the perfect thing to be trying to contextualize our lives right now. I am really jazzed on it, and I'm probably going to watch it again really, really soon.
I'm sorry you couldn't say more about it, but I can. I feel from your energy what everything that it embodies is like. The future was then, but it's now, or whatever.
I was just amazed that it was back. That really, The Matrix was back. It was resurrected. The themes were live and vivid and compelling, and that the story actually seemed to have something to say in this day and age. I was just kind of gobsmacked that it hits all the notes.
Cool.
To be relevant.
And not another Space Jam. They
made Space Jam too. They did.
And we covered it.
Oh man. Well, thank you, Taylor. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for listening all the way through with us.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Coming out,
If you're listening to this on release day, tomorrow will be Christmas. So Merry Christmas if that's what you celebrate. If you celebrate anything else over these next few weeks, happy holidays to you. Thank you guys for listening all this year. And I can't wait to see what we get to dig into next year. All right, guys. Thank you so much, and we will catch you next time.